The message came through at 0347 hours, tearing through the silence of the command bridge like a scream in the dark. Admiral Torvan was already awake when the alert sounded. His four massive arms folded behind his back as he stared out at the endless stars beyond the viewport. The Selexian officer had lived for nearly 400 years, and in that time he had heard thousands of distress calls from dozens of species across the galaxy. But something about this one made his twin hearts beat faster. "Play it again," he commanded, his deep voice rumbling through the bridge. The communications officer, a young Oravani with pale blue scales, tapped the console with trembling fingers. Static filled the speakers first, followed by the unmistakable sounds of combat in the background weapons fire. Explosions, screaming, then the voice came through. Human and female, somehow steady despite the chaos around her. "This is Corporal Elena Vasquez of Outpost Viridian 7. Broadcasting on all Coalition frequencies," the voice said. "We are under attack by Kethvari forces. Estimated strength over 2,000 warriors. Repeat, over 2,000 hostile combatants. Requesting immediate backup. Our garrison numbers 38. We cannot hold indefinitely. Please respond." The message cut off with a burst of static and the sound of something large exploding nearby. Admiral Torvan stood perfectly still for a long moment. The mathematics were simple enough that even a child could understand. Them, 2,000 Kethvari warriors against 38 humans. The Kethvari were insectoid predators, each one standing over 2 meters tall, with armored carapaces that could deflect most small arms fire. They had 4 arms ending in razor-sharp claws, compound eyes that could see in nearly complete darkness, and a hive mind mentality that made them terrifyingly coordinated in battle. They were among the most feared warriors in the known galaxy, and there were 2,000 of them against 38 soft, fragile humans. Torvan had worked alongside humans before, had even grown to respect their strange determination and creative problem-solving. But this was not a situation where determination would matter. This was mathematics. Cold and unforgiving. "How far are we from Viridian 7? He asked. 18 hours at maximum speed. "Admiral," the navigation officer replied, 18 hours. The battle would be over in 2, maybe 3 at most. There was no scenario in which those 38 humans would still be alive when the fleet arrived. "Set course immediately," Torvan ordered anyway. Maximum speed. All ships. The 47th Combined Fleet was not small by any means. 300 soldiers from various coalition species, carried aboard 7 warships with enough firepower to level a small moon under normal circumstances. It would be more than enough to handle a Kethvari raiding party, but circumstances were not normal by the time they arrived. The only thing left to do would be to count the bodies and perhaps exact some measure of revenge on the retreating enemy. Torvan had seen the aftermath of Kethvari attacks before. The insectoids were not known for their mercy. They took trophies from their kills, and they made sure their victims suffered before the end. The Admiral closed his primary eyes and offered a silent prayer to whatever gods the humans believed in. They would need divine intervention to survive. Even the first hour, as the fleet jumped to hyperspace. Lieutenant Commander Jael entered the bridge. The Oravani officer was Torvan's second in command, a veteran of dozens of campaigns with scars across her scales to prove it. "I heard the transmission," she said quietly. "It does not seem possible." "It is not possible," Torvan agreed. "The humans are already dead, Jael. We simply have not arrived to confirm it yet." Jael's tail twitched, a sign of discomfort among her species. "I have read the coalition files on humans," she said. "They are considered unremarkable by most metrics. Average strength, average speed, relatively short lifespans, no natural weapons or armor, And yet they have expanded across 12 systems in less than 2 centuries. Luck and stubbornness, Torvan said. Though even as he spoke the words, he was not entirely sure he believed them. Perhaps, Gel replied. But I have also heard stories, Admiral. Stories that do not appear in official reports. Torvan turned to look at her. What kind of stories? Gel hesitated before answering. Stories about what happens when humans are pushed beyond their limits, she said. About the things they become capable of when they believe all hope is lost. The Selexian who told me this called it something in the human language. A word that does not translate well. What word? Desperation, Gel said. He said that human desperation is not like the desperation of other species. When we are cornered with no escape, we accept our fate and try to die with honor. But humans do not accept, they fight harder. They become something else, something that does not care about survival anymore because it has already decided that death is certain. Torvan considered this for a moment. That sounds like madness, not strategy. Perhaps madness and strategy are the same thing when the odds are impossible enough. Geo replied. The Admiral said nothing. He had led armies for centuries, had studied warfare across 100 different cultures and species. He understood tactics and logistics and the cold, equations of combat, but he had never truly understood. Humans, no one in the coalition did. They were too new, too strange, too contradictory, a species that created beautiful art and horrific weapons with equal enthusiasm, a species that preached peace while preparing constantly for war, a species that formed deep, emotional bonds with other beings, and yet could turn cold and ruthless in an instant when those bonds were threatened. The 18 hours of travel passed to slowly. Torvan spent most of it reviewing what little intelligence they had on the Viridian 7 outpost and the human garrison stationed there. The outpost was a research facility studying the mineral deposits on the planet below. It had minimal defenses, a few automated turrets, and a single shield generator, designed to repel wildlife rather than a military assault. The 38 humans stationed there were mostly scientists and technicians, with only a small security contingent of 12 actual soldiers. They had standard coalition small arms, a limited supply of ammunition, and no heavy weapons whatsoever. Against 2,000 HFY warriors with military-grade equipment and air support. It was not a battle, it was a massacre waiting to happen when the fleet finally dropped out of hyperspace above Viridian 7. Admiral Torvan was prepared for the worst. He expected to see HFY ships in orbit, the outpost burning below, the enemy collecting their trophies and preparing to leave. What he saw instead made no sense. The space around the planet was empty. No HFY ships. No debris from battle. Nothing. Scan the surface, he ordered, his voice tight with confusion. The sensor officer's fingers flew across the console. I am reading the outpost. Admiral, she reported, her voice rising with each word. It is damaged but intact. Life signs detected inside. Human life signs. One count 38. Torvan's forearms went rigid. That is not possible, he said. I have confirmed the readings 3 times. Admiral, the officer replied. All 38 humans are alive? And the HFY? A long pause. I am detecting over 2,000 HFY biosignatures on the surface. Admiral, then the battle is still ongoing, Torvan said. Already turning toward the deployment bay. We need to get troops down there immediately. No. Admiral, the sensor officer said, her voice barely above a whisper now. The HFY biosignatures are not moving. None of them are moving. They are all reading as deceased. The bridge went silent. 2,000 HFY warriors dead. All of them. And 38 humans still alive. Admiral Torvan stared at the view screen showing the planet below. And for the first time in his very long life, He felt something he had not experienced in centuries: fear. The dropship descended through the thin atmosphere of Viridian 7, and Lieutenant Commander Jael checked her weapon for the third time in as many minutes. Something was wrong. She could feel it in her scales. A tingling sensation that her species had evolved over millions of years to warn them of danger. But the danger here was not the kind she understood. 20 Coalition soldiers sat in the dropship with her. A mix of Selexians and Oravani, all veterans of combat. All armed to the teeth. They had expected to fly into a war zone. Instead, they flew into silence. Approaching the outpost now, the pilot announced over the intercom. "I am seeing significant structural damage to the exterior. Scorch marks consistent with Kethvari plasma weaponry, multiple hull breaches. But the central structure appears intact." Jael leaned forward to look through the cockpit viewport. The outpost was a mess. Walls had been torn open. Defensive turrets lay in smoking ruins, and the ground around the facility was churned up from what must have been an intense battle. But there was no movement, no Kethvari patrols, no sounds of combat. Nothing, just bodies, hundreds of them. They lay scattered across the ground in heaps. The distinctive insectoid forms of Kethvari warriors, twisted in death. Some had been shot, others had been stabbed or slashed. And some appeared to have been beaten so badly that their armored carapaces had cracked, open like eggs. Jill had seen battlefields before, but she had never seen anything like this. "By the ancient waters," one of the Selexian soldiers whispered, all four of his arms clutching his rifle tightly. What happened here? No one had an answer. The dropship touched down near the main entrance to the outpost, and Jael was the first one out. Her weapon raised and ready. The smell hit her immediately. Death had a particular odor, one that transcended species, and this place reeked of it. She counted the bodies as she walked, a habit from her years as a soldier. 20 in the immediate landing area, 30 more leading up to the main entrance and inside the breached cargo bay doors. She stopped counting because there were simply too many. The Kethvari had tried to force their way in through the cargo bay. That much was clear from the way the bodies were piled. They had pushed forward in waves, climbing over their own dead to reach the defenders inside. And somehow, impossibly, the defenders had held Jael moved carefully through the carnage, her team fanning out behind her. The further they went into the outpost, the worse it got. Every corridor told a story of desperate combat here. A group of Kethvari had been caught in an improvised explosion, their bodies flung against the walls. There. Another group had been cut down by concentrated weapons fire from a barricade, made of overturned tables and equipment, and everywhere. Signs of hand-to-hand fighting. Jael found a Kethvari warrior. With a fire extinguisher embedded in its skull, she found another, with what appeared to be a broken chair leg driven through its compound eye. She found a third that had been strangled to death with electrical cables, its claws still scratching at the makeshift garrote around its throat. The humans had fought with everything they had, and when they ran out of weapons, they had fought with whatever they could find. "Lieutenant Commander," one of her soldiers called out, his voice echoing through the ruined corridors. "I have found the survivors." Jael made her way to the central mess hall, stepping over more bodies as she went. The door had been reinforced with welded metal plates and what looked like pieces of the facility's own infrastructure. Someone had turned this room into a fortress within the fortress, a last stand position if everything else failed. She pushed open the door and stepped inside. The 38 humans were there, just as the sensors had indicated, and they were all alive. But something was terribly wrong. They sat in scattered groups around the mess hall, some at tables, some on the floor, some standing against the walls. None of them were speaking. None of them were moving. They just existed, frozen in place like statues of flesh and bone. Jael had seen this before in soldiers. After particularly brutal battles, shell shock, the humans called it. But this was different. These soldiers were not shaking or crying or screaming. They were simply empty. Their eyes staring at nothing. Their hands still clutching weapons that no longer needed to be held. A woman sat at the nearest table. Her uniform covered in blood, both red and the sickly green of HFY ichor. Her face was pale. Her dark hair matted with sweat and gore, and her hands would not stop moving. Cleaning a rifle that was already spotless, Corporal Elena Vasquez recognized her from the distress call. "Corporal," Jael said softly, approaching the woman slowly as one might approach a wounded animal. "We received your transmission. The Coalition fleet is here." "You are safe now." Vasquez looked up, and Jael felt her scales tighten in response to what she saw in the human's eyes. There was nothing there. No relief, no fear, no joy at being rescued. Just a vast emptiness where something essential had been burned away. "You are late," Vasquez said, her voice flat and toneless. "We handled it." Jael looked around the mess hall at the other survivors. A young man sat in the corner, rocking back and forth slightly, his fingers tracing patterns in the blood that had dried on his arms. An older woman stood by the window, staring out at the field of bodies below, her hand pressed against the glass as if she could not quite believe what she was seeing. A group of 3 soldiers sat together at a table, not speaking, not looking at each other, just existing in the same space. All of them showed the same signs. All of them had that same terrible emptiness in their eyes. "Corporal," Jael tried again, "can you tell me what happened here?" Vasquez's hands stopped moving on the rifle. She looked down at the weapon as if seeing it for the first time, then placed it carefully on the table. "They came at night," she said, her voice still carrying no emotion whatsoever. "We knew they were coming because the perimeter sensors went off. But we did not expect so many. Nobody expected so many." She paused, her eyes unfocusing for a moment. "We retreated to defensive positions," she continued. "Standard protocols, textbook stuff really. But they just kept coming. Every time we killed one, 2 more took its place. Our ammunition started running low after the first 4 hours. 4 hours of continuous combat. Jael could barely imagine it. Most battles were decided in minutes, not hours. What did you do when the ammunition ran out?" she asked. Vasquez smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression Jael had ever seen on any face in any species. "We improvised," the corporal said. "Humans are good at improvising. Did you know that? We can turn anything into a weapon if we have to. Anything at all." She gestured vaguely at the corridor outside. "Jenkins killed 6 of them with a broken pipe," she said. "Martinez used her boot knife until it snapped. Then she used her teeth. Private Chun took a blade through his shoulder in hour 8 and kept fighting until hour 14 when we forced him to stop." Jael felt her translation implant struggle with some of the words, not because they were difficult to translate, but because they described things that should not have been possible. "How long did the battle last?" she asked. 19 hours, Vasquez replied. "Give or take. 19 hours, 38 humans against 2,000. HFY for 19 hours. They tried to retreat 3 times, Vasquez continued, her voice taking on a distant quality. "We did not let them. We followed them. Hunted them through the corridors and the cargo bays and the maintenance tunnels. We were not going to let any of them escape. Not one." She looked up at Jael, and for just a moment, something flickered in those empty eyes, something dark and primal and utterly inhuman. "They tried to surrender," Vasquez said, "at hour 16. They'd put down their weapons and made gestures that even we could recognize as pleading for mercy." Jael's blood ran cold. "What did you do?" Vasquez did not answer. She did not need to. The thousands of bodies outside answered for her. Jael stepped back, suddenly very aware that she was surrounded by 38 humans who had just killed 2,000 of the most feared warriors in the galaxy, and they had not stopped even when the enemy begged for their lives. "We won," Vasquez said quietly, picking up her rifle again and resuming the endless cleaning. We won. But Aziel looked around at the hollow faces of the survivors, at the hands that would not stop shaking, at the eyes that had seen too much and forgotten how to unsee it. She was not so sure they had won the battle. Yes, but Aziel could not help wondering what they had lost in the process. Admiral Torvan stood in the tactical analysis chamber aboard his flagship, surrounded by holographic displays showing every moment of the battle that had taken place on Viridian 7. He had watched the recording 17 times now, and he still could not believe what he was seeing. The footage came from the station's internal security cameras, grainy and damaged in places, but clear enough to tell the story. It began with the first wave of Kethvari pouring through the breached cargo bay doors, hundreds of chitinous warriors flooding into the facility like water breaking through a dam. The human defenders were waiting for them. They had set up barricades at every choke point, positioned shooters with overlapping fields of fire, and created kill zones that turned the corridors into death traps. The first wave died in seconds, cut down by concentrated weapons fire before they could even reach the barricades. But the Kethvari did not stop. They never stopped. Wave after wave came, climbing over the bodies of their fallen comrades, absorbing losses that would have broken any other army. And the humans held. For hours, they held, rotating defenders in shifts of 5 so that some could rest while others fought. They conserved ammunition with disciplined fire, making every shot count. When one barricade fell, they retreated to the next, making the enemy pay for every meter of ground. Torvan had studied warfare for 4 centuries, and he had never seen anything like it. Admiral, a voice said from behind him, I have completed my analysis. He turned to face Dr. Yenel, the fleet's chief xenobiologist. The elderly scientist was a member of a species called the Threnody, small beings with oversized heads and multiple pairs of eyes that gave them excellent observational skills. She had been studying human biology since their species first made contact with the Coalition, and Torvan had asked her to explain how this impossible victory had occurred from the way her multiple eyes kept blinking in patterns that indicated distress. He suspected he was not going to like what she had found. Show me, he said. Dr. Yenel gestured with her tiny hands, and the holographic display shifted to show complex biological data. Human physiology is more remarkable than we initially understood, she began, her voice carrying the dry precision of a scientist delivering findings that terrified her. We knew they possessed an adrenaline response to danger, similar to many other species, but we vastly underestimated its effects. The display showed a diagram of human brain chemistry. When humans perceive a mortal threat, their bodies trigger a cascade of hormonal and neurological changes, Yenal explained. Adrenaline floods their system, increasing heart rate and blood pressure. Cortisol suppresses non-essential functions like digestion and immune response, and a cocktail of other chemicals fundamentally alters their mental state. She highlighted several compounds on the display. These substances would be toxic to most other species in these concentrations, she said. They would cause organ failure within hours if maintained at these levels. But human bodies are designed to survive them, at least temporarily. Torvan leaned forward. What are the effects? Pain suppression first, Yenal said. A human in this state can sustain injuries that would incapacitate any other species and continue functioning, not because they do not feel pain, but because their brain simply stops caring about it. The signal reaches their consciousness, but fails to trigger a protective response. The display shifted to show enhanced reflexes and reaction times. Their neural processing speed increases dramatically. Yenal continued. They become faster, more alert, better able to react to threats. Their senses sharpen to an almost predatory level. This sounds like an advantage, Torvan said. Not a horror. Yenal's eyes blinked rapidly. I have not finished, Admiral. She brought up new data, this time showing brain scans taken from the survivors. The most significant change occurs in the prefrontal cortex, she said. This is the part of the human brain responsible for higher reasoning, moral judgment, impulse control, and long-term planning. During extreme stress responses, this region becomes suppressed. Torvan began to understand. They lose their ability to reason? No, Yenal said. They retain reasoning but lose something else. They lose the ability to question their actions, to doubt, to hesitate, to feel empathy for their enemies, to recognize when a threat has passed. Their brain enters a state focused entirely on one goal: eliminate the threat. The display showed the security footage again, this time with biological data overlaid on the human defenders. Look here, Yenal said, pointing to a timestamp in the battle. This is hour 12. The humans have been fighting continuously for half a day. Any other species would be exhausted to the point of collapse. But look at their hormone levels. The data showed adrenaline and cortisol levels that were off the charts. They are not running on energy reserves, Yenal explained. They are burning themselves from the inside, converting their own tissue into fuel, damaging their organs, destroying their minds, all to keep fighting. She highlighted one particular soldier on the display, Private Marcus Chen, she said. He took a Kethvari blade through shoulder at hour 8. The wound severed major blood vessels and caused significant muscle damage. He should have gone into shock within minutes, the footage showed. Chen pulling the blade out of his own shoulder with his other hand, then using that same blade to kill the Kethvari who had stabbed him. He fought for another 6 hours before anyone noticed he was injured, Yenal said. His body had simply decided that bleeding to death was less important than winning the fight. Torvan felt his twin hearts beating faster. You said the Kethvari tried to surrender, he said. What happened? Yenal hesitated before bringing up the relevant footage. By hour 16, the Kethvari had lost over 70% of their forces. She said, their hive mind coordination broke down under the sustained losses. Individual warriors began making independent decisions, and many of those decisions were to flee or surrender. The footage showed a group of Kethvari dropping their weapons, raising their forearms in what was clearly a gesture of submission. A human approached them. A woman Torvan now recognized as Corporal Vasquez. She looked at the surrendering warriors for a long moment. Then she raised her weapon and shot them one by one. The humans did not accept a surrender. Yenal said quietly, they could not accept it. Their brains were no longer capable of recognizing the threat as neutralized. As long as the enemy existed, they would continue fighting. Torvan watched as the scene repeated itself. Throughout the station, Kethvari warriors trying to flee were hunted down and killed. Those who hid were found and executed. Those who fought to the death at least died quickly. Those who tried to surrender did not. How did it end? Torvan asked. The last Kethvari died at hour 19, Yenal said. After that, the humans had nothing left to fight. So they stopped, but their bodies did not return to normal. The stress response did not shut off cleanly. She brought up brain scans of the survivors. Their prefrontal cortex function is still suppressed, she said. Their hormone levels are still elevated. They are stuck in this state, unable to fully transition back to normal cognitive function. Is it permanent? Yenal's many eyes all looked away. We do not know, she admitted. Human medicine has documented this phenomenon. They call it many things: combat fatigue, shell shock, post-traumatic stress. But they have never seen a case this severe. These humans did not just experience extreme stress. They lived in it for 19 hours. They marinated in their own survival chemicals until those chemicals rewrote their brains. Torvan turned back to the footage. Watching the final moments of the battle, He saw humans who looked more like machines than living beings, their movements efficient and brutal, their faces showing no emotion whatsoever. They killed with the same detachment that a factory robot might show while assembling parts. They poisoned themselves, Yenal said. They allowed their bodies to destroy their minds in order to survive. And they won, Admiral, against odds that no species in the coalition has ever beaten. But the cost. She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. Torvan watched Corporal Vasquez on the screen, standing alone in a corridor filled with bodies, her weapon hanging at her side, her eyes staring at nothing. She had won. They had all won, but looking at her face, at the emptiness where a person used to be. Torvan was not sure if winning and losing meant the same thing to humans as it did to everyone else. Perhaps for humans, there was a third option. Perhaps sometimes you won the battle and lost yourself. The evacuation should have been simple. Load the survivors onto dropships, transport them to the fleet's medical bay, treat their wounds, and begin the long journey home. But nothing about this situation was simple, Lieutenant Commander. Jael stood at the entrance to the mess hall, watching as her soldiers tried to coax the humans toward the waiting evacuation craft. It was not going well. Please, a Selexian medic said to a young human male, keeping his voice calm and his forearms spread in a non-threatening gesture. We need to examine your injuries. You have been through significant trauma and require medical attention. The human did not respond. He sat against the wall, his knees pulled up to his chest, his eyes fixed on some point in the distance that only he could see. His hands kept making small movements, fingers curling as if gripping a weapon that was no longer there. Perhaps we should sedate them, another medic suggested quietly. For their own safety and ours, Jael shook her head. We do not know how human physiology will react to our sedatives in their current state, she said. Dr. Yenal has advised against any chemical intervention until we better understand what has happened to them. The medic looked frustrated but nodded across the room. Corporal Vasquez stood near the center of the space, surrounded by coalition soldiers who were keeping their distance. She had not moved from that spot in over an hour. Her eyes tracked every person who entered or left the room, and her hand rested on the rifle that still hung from her shoulder. Corporal. Jael approached her carefully. We need to transport you and your team to the fleet. The rescue ships are waiting. Vasquez's eyes focused on Jael with unsettling intensity. We cannot leave, she said. Why not? The perimeter is not secure, Vasquez replied, her voice carrying the flat certainty of someone stating an obvious fact. There may be more of them. We need to hold position until we are certain the area is clear. Jael felt her scales tighten. Corporal, we have scanned the entire planet, she said gently. There are no more Kethvari. The battle is over. You won. Something flickered behind Vasquez's eyes. For just a moment, Jael thought she saw recognition there. A glimpse of the person, the corporal, had been before 19 hours of hell had burned her down to this. But then it was gone. Scans can be fooled, Vasquez said. They could be hiding, could be underground, could be using jamming technology. We need to maintain defensive positions until confirmation is absolute. She was not being irrational in the traditional sense. Her logic was perfectly sound. If somewhat paranoid, it was the logic of someone who had learned at great cost that the enemy could appear from anywhere at any time. The problem was that the lesson had been learned too well. I understand your concerns, Jael said, but my soldiers will secure the area. You have done enough, more than enough. Let us take over now. Vasquez did not move. Her hand stayed on her rifle behind her. The other survivors had started to cluster together, a defensive formation that had probably saved their lives during the battle. Now it looked less like military discipline and more like a pack of wounded predators preparing to fight anyone who came too close. One of the Selexian soldiers approached the group with a medical kit. I just want to check your wounds, he said, reaching toward a young woman with burns covering half her face. This will help with the pain." The woman's reaction was instantaneous. One moment she was sitting passively. The next, she was on her feet with a sharpened piece of metal pressed against the selection's throat. She moved faster than anyone present had expected a wounded human could move. "Do not touch me," she hissed. Her voice barely human. The Selexian froze. His forearms spread wide. "I apologize," he said, keeping his voice steady. "I should have asked permission. I meant no threat." Several other humans had risen to their feet, weapons appearing in their hands as if by magic. Jael had thought they were unarmed after the Coalition soldiers had collected their firearms. She had been wrong. They had knives, sharpened debris, improvised clubs, and in one case, what appeared to be a garrote made from twisted cables. They had kept backup weapons hidden. Of course, they had. "Everyone stand down," Jael commanded, raising her own hands to show she meant no harm. "There is no threat here. We are allies." The woman with the metal shard kept it pressed against the Selexian's throat for a long moment. Then, slowly, she stepped back, but she did not put the weapon away. She held it at her side, ready to strike again in an instant. "Private Tanaka," Vasquez said, her voice carrying no judgment whatsoever. "Report status. Ready to engage." Tanaka replied automatically. "Perimeter compromised by unknown forces. Awaiting orders." Jael felt a chill run through her. Tanaka was not speaking to Vasquez. She was speaking to whatever fragment of military structure still existed in her fractured mind. To her, this was not a rescue. It was another phase of the battle, and the Coalition soldiers were not allies. They were unknown contacts who had not yet been classified as friendly or hostile. "Corporal Vasquez," Jael said, choosing her words very carefully. "I am Lieutenant Commander Jael of the 47th Combined Fleet. We received your distress call and responded. We are here to help you. Do you understand?" Vasquez looked at her for a long moment. "I understand what you are saying," she replied. "I do not understand why you expect us to believe it. Why would we lie?" "The HFY tried to trick us twice during the battle," Vasquez said. "Once they sent warriors wearing damaged Coalition armor taken from a supply ship they had raided. Another time, they broadcast false surrender signals to draw us out of defensive positions." Her eyes narrowed. "How do we know you are really Coalition forces?" It was a reasonable question in a completely unreasonable context. These humans had fought so long and so hard that they had lost the ability to trust anyone. The very survival instincts that had kept them alive were now preventing them from accepting rescue. Jael tried a different approach. "My name is Jael," she said. "I was born on a Rovan Prime 87 years ago. I have served in the Coalition military for 62 years. I have a mate named Fenris and 2 offspring named Lissa and Varric. I am telling you this because I want you to know that I am a real person. Not a trick, not a trap. Just someone who came a very long way to help you." Vasquez listened without expression. "I had a sister," she said after a moment. "Her name was Maria. She was 3 years older than me, and she used to call me Little Shadow, because I followed her everywhere when we were children." A pause. "I cannot remember what her face looks like anymore. I know I should remember, but when I try to picture her, all I can see is the HFY. Their compound eyes, their claws, the way they died when I killed them. That is all that is in my head now. Just enemies and death." Jael did not know what to say. "Something is broken inside us," Vasquez continued, her voice cracking slightly for the first time since the Coalition forces had arrived. "We went somewhere during the fighting, somewhere deep and dark and terrible, and I do not think we know how to come back. The thing that tells you when to stop fighting, when to trust, when to feel safe. I cannot find it anymore. I keep looking, and it is not there." She looked down at her hands, still covered in the dried blood of 2 species. "We won," she said. "That is what everyone keeps saying. We won the battle. 38 humans against 2,000 HFY, and we won. It should feel like a victory. It should feel like something. Her hands were shaking now. But all I feel is empty. And all I want to do is keep fighting, because fighting is the only thing that makes sense anymore. The only thing I know how to do. She looked up at Jael with eyes that held an ocean of pain. How do you stop being a monster when you needed to become one to survive? Jael had no answer. She suspected no one did. She reached out slowly, giving Vasquez every opportunity to pull away, and placed her scaled hand on the human's shoulder. I do not know, she admitted. But you do not have to figure it out alone, and you do not have to figure it out today. Right now, all you have to do is get on the ship. Can you do that? Vasquez trembled under her touch. For a long, terrible moment, Jael thought she was going to pull away, going to retreat back into that defensive shell that had kept her alive. But then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. Okay, she whispered. Okay. It was not much, but it was a start. 6 months passed before Admiral Torvan received a classified report. He read it alone in his quarters. The door locked, the lights dimmed, and when he finished, he sat in silence for a very long time. The 38 humans of Outpost Viridian 7 had been transported to a specialized facility on a moon in the Terran system. It was officially listed as a research station in Coalition records. But Torvan knew its true purpose. It was a place where broken soldiers went to find out if they could be put back together. The report detailed the progress of each survivor in clinical language that somehow made the tragedy more acute. Some had responded well to treatment. The human doctors called it cognitive behavioral therapy combined with medication, to help regulate the chemicals that still flooded their systems, slowly. Painstakingly, these lucky few had begun to reconnect with the parts of themselves they had lost during the battle. They laughed again, formed relationships, spoke about the future without that terrible emptiness in their eyes. 12 of the 38 fell into this category. They would never be exactly who they were before Viridian 7. But they would live something resembling normal lives. Others were not so fortunate. 14 of the survivors remained in intensive care, their minds trapped in that twilight state between combat and peace. They functioned well enough in controlled environments, but could not handle anything that their damaged psyches interpreted as a potential threat. A door closing too loudly, a stranger approaching too quickly, a shadow moving in unexpected ways. Any of these could trigger episodes that left them shaking and violent for hours afterward. They might improve with time and continued treatment, or they might spend the rest of their lives in that facility, prisoners of their own survival instincts. The remaining 12 had been classified as unable to reintegrate into civilian life under any circumstances. Torvan read their individual files with growing horror. Private Yuki Tanaka, the woman who had nearly killed the Selexian medic, had attempted to escape the facility 3 times. Each time she had caused significant damage and injured multiple staff members before being subdued. She insisted that the Kethvari were still coming, that the battle was not over, that everyone around her was either an enemy or a potential casualty. Specialist James Morrison had stopped speaking entirely. He sat in his room day after day, cleaning weapons that he no longer possessed, preparing for a fight that had ended months ago. When doctors tried to engage him in conversation, he simply looked through them as if they were not their Private First Class David Okonkwo had taken. His own life, 3 weeks after arriving at the facility, his note, brief and heartbreaking, said only that he could not live with what he had done to survive, that he saw the faces of the Kethvari, who had surrendered every time he closed his eyes, that some victories were not worth winning. Torvan set the report aside and stared at the wall of his quarters. He had lived for nearly 4 centuries and had seen terrible things in that time. He had witnessed the fall of civilizations, the extinction of species, the casual cruelty that intelligent beings could inflict upon each other. But somehow, this was different. The humans had not been defeated. They had won an impossible victory against overwhelming odds. They had done what No other species in Coalition history had ever done, and it had destroyed them anyway. A soft chime indicated an incoming communication. Torvan activated the display to find an official message from the Galactic Coalition Council. The Kethvari had requested an emergency session to address their ongoing conflict with humanity. Given that the Kethvari had initiated hostilities against human colonies 17 times in the past decade, this was unusual. They had never shown any interest in negotiation before Torvan attended the session remotely. Watching from his ship as the Kethvari, Ambassador took the speaking platform before the assembled representatives. Ambassador Crixthil was ancient by Kethvari standards. A warrior who had fought in campaigns across half the galaxy for over 300 years. His carapace bore the scars of 1,000 battles, and his compound eyes held the cold calculation of a being who had killed more enemies than most species had individuals. When he spoke, his voice carried through the translation matrix with perfect clarity. We have come to announce a change in Kethvari policy regarding the human species. Crixthil declared, effective immediately. All Kethvari military operations against human territories are suspended indefinitely. We are prepared to negotiate a formal peace treaty at humanity's convenience. Murmurs of shock rippled through the council chamber. The Kethvari did not negotiate. They did not surrender. They fought until they won or until they were completely annihilated. And even then, individual warriors would continue the battle long after any hope of victory had passed. This is unprecedented. The council moderator said, "May we ask what has prompted this change in position?" Crixthil's compound eye swept. Across the assembled representatives, we have received detailed reports from our intelligence services regarding an incident at a human facility designated Viridian 7. He said, "We have reviewed the battle footage, analyzed the tactical data, and studied the biological information provided by Coalition medical staff." He paused, and when he continued, his voice was different, lower, almost reverent. "We believed humans were prey," he said. "Soft creatures with fragile bodies and short lifespans. They had no natural weapons, no armor, no hive mind coordination. By every metric we use to evaluate threats, they should have been easy conquests." Another pause. We were wrong. The chamber fell completely silent. The humans at Viridian 7 faced over 2,000 of our warriors. Crixthil continued, "Odds of more than 50 to 1. Any other species would have died within hours. Any other species would have broken under such pressure. But the humans did not break." His claws clicked against the speaking platform. They did something we have never seen before. They became something else, something that does not retreat, something that does not surrender, something that does not stop until every enemy is dead, or it is dead itself. He turned to face the human delegation directly. "We have fought the Selexians in their battle rage," he said. "We have fought the Oravani in their blood frenzy. We have fought a dozen species in their most dangerous states. But none of them compare to what we saw in that footage." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "The Selexian rage exhausts itself after hours. The Oravani frenzy burns out when their bodies can no longer sustain it. But the humans fought for 19 hours without stopping. Their bodies should have collapsed from exhaustion. Their minds should have shattered from the stress, but they simply refused." He straightened to his full height, and when we tried to surrender, when our warriors laid down their weapons and begged for mercy, the humans did not stop. The weight of that statement hung in the air. "We understand now what humans truly are," Crixthil said. "They are not the soft prey we believed them to be. They are something far more dangerous. They are beings who can choose to become monsters, who can look into the darkest parts of themselves and embrace what they find there, who can throw away everything that makes them who they are in order to destroy their enemies." He shook his massive head slowly. "We do not fear death," he said. "No Kethvari fears death, but we fear what we saw in that footage. We fear a species that can do what those humans did and still call themselves civilized. We fear what would happen if humanity ever decided to stop holding back. The human delegation sat in stunned silence. We will not wake them again. Trixthale concluded. We will not give them another reason to become what they became at Viridian 7. From this day forward, the Kethvari Collective declares humanity to be not prey, not enemies, but beings to be left alone permanently and irrevocably. He turned and walked out of the chamber without waiting for questions. The session ended in confused silence. Later that evening, Admiral Torvan added the recording of the council session to his personal archive, along with the battle footage from Viridian 7 and the medical reports on the survivors. He did not keep these files as a tactical study. He kept them as a reminder that the species he had considered soft and fragile possessed something that none of the ancient warrior races of the galaxy could match. Not strength, not speed, not technology, something more fundamental. They possessed the ability to become what they needed to become, to sacrifice pieces of themselves for victory, to stare into the abyss and jump in willingly if that was what survival required. And the most terrifying part was not that they could do it. It was that they could come back afterward, broken, damaged, forever changed, but still themselves. Still human. Corporal Elena Vasquez eventually returned to active duty. Torvan saw her name in a report 2 years later. Assigned to a diplomatic protection detail, she had requested the position specifically because it was low risk, because she needed to prove to herself that she could exist in a world without enemies, that she could be more than what Viridian 7 had made her. The report noted that she still sometimes woke screaming in the night, still sometimes saw threats where none existed, still sometimes felt that terrible emptiness where her old self used to live. But she was trying. They all were. And perhaps that was the most human thing of all. Not the capacity for violence, not the ability to become monsters.